Hello, everybody, and welcome. And my name is Pádraig Berry, and I'm the Managing Director of TTI Success Insights here in Ireland. And today I want to talk to you about the talent pipeline right in front of your nose. So I have three questions that I want to address. The first one is, would you agree that it's very hard to find good people right now? Second one, have you ever considered that some of your best future hires may actually be working for your organization already? And your third, how can we identify and develop good internal candidates for roles that are open right now or maybe open in the future, but at the same time build employee engagement, satisfaction, and performance? Now let's look at them one by one. How would you agree that it's very hard to find good people right now? Well, I don't know where in the world you are watching this, but here in Ireland, the unemployment rate was 4.4% in January 2023. That's down from a pre-pandemic level of 4.8% in January 2020. It is incredibly hard to hire anybody right now because there's nobody available. Second, have you ever considered that some of your best future hires could be working for your organization already? We know that in today's world, it's essential that organizations do everything they can to make sure their good employees stay with them and for as long as possible. Having a clear internal development and career progression strategy is key to this. And third, how can we identify and develop good internal candidates? Well, I'm sure you're familiar with the Peter principle, that people are promoted to the level of their own incompetence. But why are they promoted? Well, clearly they're promoted because they're competent, or else they wouldn't have been promoted, i.e. they were competent at the level they were at. They were well suited to their role. They were well matched, if you wish. But why did they fail when they're promoted to a higher level? Was it because they did not have the competences required for success in that role, as the Peter principle says? And what does it mean to be well suited to one's role? And how can we promote people to roles where they will be successful, where they are well suited? Now, in a poll that I did recently, asking participants in a webinar, did they have a clear employee retention strategy with a written plan that you implement? And I asked them to say yes, sort of, or no. And I got 75% no, 25% sort of, and nobody said yes. So nobody had a clear strategy, internal employee retention strategy developed, one that they were actually practically implementing. Now, I want to divide this talk into three parts. I want to talk about the top issues in the labour market today, the pros and cons of internal and external hiring, and the methodology to increase the chances of internal hires being successful. So let's start with the top issues. So inflation and labour market dislocation. These are the two most important issues facing everybody today. Anecdotally, from my own practical experience, that over the last 12 months, my grocery bill has gone up by at the very least 20%, or probably more like 25%. My utilities cost has gone up by 100%. It's doubled what it was. And despite what everybody says about inflation coming down, in fact, it seems to be stuck at a particular level. And there is a risk that it's going to become secondary, i.e. it will get into wage inflation, which will lead on to further price inflation and so on. Second issue, labour market dislocation. Vacancies are 60% higher right now than they were before the pandemic. And if we look at these figures, and they come from McKinsey's 2.0 global survey, the Great Attrition Survey, They say that monthly job openings increased by 3.7 million per month, from 6.36 to 10.06. And the increase in job openings is not just down to a drop in participation. And there is a drop in participation. But it's also that the population is aging quickly. And this is true right across the developed world. There's also evidence of a lasting jobs skills mismatch, that people do not have the skills for the new jobs. And the third takeaway is that more workers are reevaluating what they actually want from job, from life, and so on. And let's just look at that reevaluation for a moment. Again, same survey. The key takeaways here are that workforce discontent is a global phenomenon. Almost 3/4 of employee respondents believe that it would be easy or not difficult to find a job that pays at the very least the same or better with the same benefits. And three things we need to look at here: reshuffling, reinventing, and reassessing. Reshuffling is very, very simple. Employees are quitting and going to different employers in different industries. 48% of the job leavers in that survey. In the case of reinventing, many employees leaving traditional employment are either going to non-traditional work, for example, temporary or the gig economy or part-time roles, or start their own businesses. Of the employees who quit without a new job in hand, 47% return to the workforce, but only 29% of them return to traditional full-time employment. And lastly, reassessing. Many people are quitting not for other jobs because of life demands. They want to care for children, elders, or themselves. They may have stepped out of the workforce entirely, dramatically reducing the available talent pool. And a key takeaway from the same survey: mobility between industries is high. 65% did not return to the same industry. And last takeaway here, there seems to be less of a stigma attached to job hopping or gaps in a resume. And joining companies in other geographies is more easy now. It's simpler because relocation has become easier because people are working online. It's all based on remote working. And the final, I think, really interesting statistic coming out of this is top reasons for quitting 2021, 2022, April to April. And we look there, 41% lack of career development and advancement opportunities, and 34% uncaring and uninspiring leaders. And these are things we can address. We can address development opportunities, creating development opportunities for people, and we can train people in leadership development. So I think some really, really interesting statistics coming out of that survey. And here's an interesting model that I got from TTI in the US, a new way to target employee value proposition. And they propose 5 personas here: the traditionalists, the do-it-yourself, the caregiver, the idealists, and the relaxers. And what they're saying here, very simply, is that there are different personas looking for different things from their roles. Some people are career-orientated, willing to work full-time, they value compensation, title, status, etc. This is traditionalist. But there won't be enough of these people to fill all the jobs. And then we have the anything for autonomy people. They want flexibility, meaningful work, and compensation. The at home but want more people. Again, they want flexibility, but there's support for employee well-being, and they want career development. The idealist, the student and younger part-timer, aged 18 to 24, and they're really emphasizing flexibility and meaningful work. And they value compensation least. And the last group, the relaxers, career isn't number one anymore for them. The retirees, not looking for work, but they might return on the right, given the right circumstances, the right conditions. So let's look at the second item on our agenda, the pros and cons of internal versus external recruitment. And there are both. And I'm not arguing here that internal recruitment is the answer to everything, but I am arguing that we need to consider it carefully. Recently, a client told me that it costs 5 to 10 times more to find a new customer than to retain an existing one. And I wondered if the same applied to finding and retaining employees. So I did a bit of Googling. And here's the list of what I found. But let's talk on the first. Is there hard direct costs associated with hiring a new employee? The average cost of replacing an employee varies between 30 and 150% of the salary. The second, it takes less time and money to hire somebody internally, and the starting salary of an external hire is on average 18 to 20% more than that of an internal candidate, according to a Wharton School study. Conversely, as internal candidates are already part of your workforce, so the time you need to find and engage those candidates is much less. It's easier to assess internal candidates because they're pre-screened for cultural fit, their track record is visible, they're working for you, and they may not always need as comprehensive an interview and indeed an onboarding process. The opportunity cost, the fourth item on the little list there, is the interesting one. I mean, if, for example, somebody leaves the company and you're hiring somebody externally, you've nobody ready to step into the position, there's a gap. And how long can a role be empty before it starts to affect your business or your organization? So there's an opportunity cost associated with this as well. It's not just the hard cost of hiring, it's the impact it has on your organization. Motivating and incentivizing current employees, to me, is a really big one here. A study by LinkedIn found that 24% of employees who were looking for a new job cited being overlooked for promotion by their current employer as a main motivation for leaving. And according to a study by Udemy, 46% cite a lack of opportunity to learn new skills as the top culprit of workplace boredom. A study by Gallup found that opportunity to learn and grow is one of the top 3 factors in retaining millennials. And also, I think another interesting way to think about this is promoting from within sends a message that you value your employees and you want to invest in them. And this in turn, by giving them more opportunity to advance their careers or even letting them move laterally to same level positions that may interest them, it's good for overall morale. They develop professionally and others see that and know that they also will have similar opportunities in the future. And this, I think, builds a culture of trust and enhances employee engagement and retention. And also, employees of companies with high internal mobility stay almost twice as long with their employer and as peer companies with low internal mobility. And employee retention, as we all know, tends to improve when employees are empowered to direct their own growth. So this, to me, is a really big one that motivates and incentivizes current employees. Multiple talents and interests is also interesting because quite often we're looking for very specific people because we don't recognize that other people have talents and interests that may in fact match this role. Lateral moves can help employees find a place in the company where they can play to their strengths to the highest degree. And I think facilitating cross-disciplinary hiring is a great way to develop functional leaders because they know quite a number of different roles in the organization. They've worked in different departments and they can share knowledge from that previous department when they move across. The identifying employee strengths, the only comment I make here is that matching employees' strengths and their career goals with opportunities within the company is critical. And I'll be talking in a while about, for me, one of the key ways of doing this, which is using talent assessments. The shorten the learning curve is also a good one because with internal recruitment, there's no need for a comprehensive onboarding. People still require training for sure for the new role, but there's a much lower learning curve than somebody completely new to the business because the internal person knows the company, they know the culture, they know the policies and practice. They may indeed be familiar with people and teams, especially in a smaller business. And they may well understand the role already, or at the very least the content and the context of the role. An interesting study from Wharton School of Management found that external candidates receive higher salaries, I mentioned already, but they also receive lower scores on their performance reviews. In fact, external recruits are 60% more likely to be fired than internal hires. Now, this is probably a function of the cultural fit and of the learning curve, the steeper learning curve. And on that cultural fit, just to come to the last point, remember this: if somebody's been working in a company for a number of years, you already have insights into the cultural fit, and you know whether or not they fit the organization or the team that they're moving to. And so all studies I mean, the renewable studies that show that cultural fit is a great predictor of a likelihood for a hire to stay in the position during the first year. And I'll just make one quick comment on that. If you don't have a culture of actually internal recruitment, promoting people and moving people across farms, you really need to get the management team on board with that. And so they understand you're not just stealing their talent, that this is in everybody's interests. And not an easy thing to do sometimes, but absolutely something worth considering. And last comment, a HBR study identified that if you are recruiting internally, and having an open selection process is much better than having a process where people are just recommended by managers, because it removes bias. Again, I'll talk about that in a bit of detail in a while. It removes bias, but also it opens up to all the talents, because remember, I mentioned earlier, people may have strengths and talents that you're not even aware of because they haven't been measured for those before. So simply, if you're in a position where some or all of the following apply, then internal recruitment is probably for you. Where you have a small budget, you want somebody who has significant company knowledge, lots of high potentials, eager to take the next step. The skills needed are already available within your talent pool. Why would you look outside? And you're a time crunch to fill an important position. Or indeed, there are no external candidates or suitable external candidates available, or at least that you can see easily. But where the following apply, then external recruitment may be an appropriate option for you. When you need to grow the business, bring in fresh perspective, new diversity, when a change in direction or mentality is required, when there's a limit to your pool of internal applicants, when you need to acquire new skills that you actually don't have in the organization, and when an internal recruitment process might create too much competition and resentment among employees. And this happens quite a bit. And so if you are doing the internal recruitment, you need to be very careful how you do it. It needs to be I'll talk about this again in a while. It needs to be very transparent, very clear to everybody. And also, the last comment I'd make is you want to avoid an inflexible culture. So you want to bring flexibility into a culture. Now, let's our third item, the process. And so the first one was what's happening in the market. The second was the pros and cons. And now here's the process that I recommend to you for building a internal recruitment succession planning, promotion type of model. And I just say, before I say anything about it, remember, if you're going to go down this road, ease of use is critical. If it isn't easy to use, people just won't bother. The second is it must be transparent. For the reason I mentioned just a minute or two ago, must be transparent. Everyone must understand how it works, because you have to have people trusting the process. And the last thing is, if you develop a system, make sure it's a system that once you've used it in the sense of identifying roles, identifying people and matching them, and using assessment or using tools to do it, you can then use those tools, use those assessments to do other things right across the talent continuum. So let's start. The first thing to say here is, clearly there are many dimensions to superior performance. We all know this. And any process is critical that we look at as many as possible, i.e. to get as many data points as possible. So if we're going to go through this process, let's use as many tools to get as many data points as we can to inform our decisions. To have a toolkit, if you wish. And I think the argument I would make to you is as follows. I want you to imagine a classic example of the New Year's resolution, where we all decide we're going to get lean and mean and fit and healthy and lose weight and whatever. Well, having a weighing scale is useful for sure, but so is a measuring tape, knowing your body mass index, perhaps your stamina, your balance, your strength, your suppleness, how much you eat, how often you eat, and so on and so forth. You get the picture. I mean, what you're looking for is multiple data points that help inform the decision. And clearly one metric is typically not sufficient to do this. So let's look at the process I'm recommending to you, the TTI DEEP process. And we discover, engage, advance, perform. So discover talent. How do we identify and discover talent internally and externally? 2, how do we engage that talent? 3, how do we help that talent develop and grow? And 4, how do we help them perform to their maximum potential, their highest potential? So let's look at the model. What we want to do is we want to discover the talent, engage the talent, advance the talent, and help it perform to its maximum. And to do this, you can see here a series of steps. So we want to prepare, define, search, screen, select, onboard. But then once we've onboarded, we want to help these people understand the people they're working for, understand the role, do a development plan so for superior performance in that role, understand the key deliverables of the role, put a performance management system in place to help them perform to their maximum potential, put a succession plan in place, and so we can compare them to other roles, potential future roles for them, a development plan in place to help them get to those roles, a performance management to make sure that in fact they're moving along that development plan, and so on and so forth. So let's look at discover, just as a simple example. So we talk about preparing, understanding the position, getting subject matter experts to understand the role involved, and developing the key accountabilities of those people, and based on those key accountabilities, those key deliverables, understanding what is required in terms of the job, what's required in terms of behaviors, motivators, competencies, in terms of hard skills, soft skills, in terms of education, experience, and so on. And coming up with a benchmark, then based on that definition, starting the search process, going through the screening process, the selection, the onboarding, and then the development process. And you can see the steps there, very, very simple and straightforward steps. Now, what I want to do is I want to jump for a second here and look at the first step in this process, exploring the job-person match. So if the job could talk, what would it say is required for superior performance? So here's the first step that was done a while back with one of our associates. It's for the head of HR. So you can see here what they did was they identified the key deliverables, the key accountabilities of the role with a group of subject matter experts, like why the role actually exists, the primary purpose of the role. And then for each one of these areas, they identified what success looks like. Like if somebody is successful in the role, what will we see? What will change? And then they talked about measurement. How will we actually measure that success? And having done that, they then applied a range of sciences, if you wish, to help them measure the role based on those key deliverables. Say if a robot was doing that job, what would the robot look like? Like what are the attributes required for superior performance in that specific job based on those specific key deliverables or key accountabilities? And the sciences that we use tend to be, we look around behaviors or DISC, motivators or driving forces, competence or skills, emotional intelligence, and acumen capacity. So these tend to be the 5 core sciences that we use in this process. And I'm going to walk through them very, very quickly for you, just to give you a sense of what I'm talking about here. So the first is exploring how do we behave, how do we communicate? And this is probably the best known assessment in the marketplace, DISC. So it explores how we engage with the world, how we deal with our problems and challenges, people and contacts, pace and consistency, and procedures and constraints. The second core science we look at is motivator or driving forces. Why do we connect? Why do we disconnect? What do we value? What's important to us? And this to me is a critical tool in evaluating a match between an individual and a role. Does the role reward what the individual is looking for, what really motivates them, what really drives them? The third science is exploring what your competence, what have you been recognized for? And again, there are 25 competencies that are typically required for most roles. And we're really into the top 7. What are the top 7 competencies required for success in this particular role? And they tend to modify these your behaviors. These are skills that you learn. I mean, behaviors and driving forces can change and we can adapt, but not significantly. Whereas these competencies, we can just go out and learn a brand new skill, a brand new competencies. And then we have EQ. Are we actively applying the principles of emotional intelligence? And that's really interesting. Looking at the areas of personal self-awareness, self-regulation, social awareness, social regulation, and intrinsic motivation. And by the way, it's worth mentioning, this is considered to be the key differentiator between top performers, where there's already a floor competence in terms of other areas like other skills and intelligence and education and so on and so forth. And the last science, we look at acumen capacity. Can we make balanced judgments and decisions? How clearly do we see ourselves? How clearly do we see the world? And as a consequence, how clearly can we make decisions and judgments? And this is my go-to assessment for all senior hires, internal or external. So then what happens then? So looking at these sciences, we have our key accountabilities. And based on the key accountabilities, we can say, if a robot was doing that job, what behaviors would it require? What motivators would it require? What competencies would it require, for example? And then we can compare people. We can measure people the same way, and we can compare people to it line by line: competency, behaviors, driving forces, and so on. We can compare them. We can compare individuals to each other, to the roles. We can compare them to the job, come up with a gap report, and come up with a comparison analysis to help us in the recruitment process. And coming out of that, it's very easy. Once we've got a gap report, we know the difference between the individual and the job. We can see where the gaps are. We can put a development plan in place to help that person become a superior performer in that role. So you can see here this process is really interesting, because I want you to imagine for a moment, just to jump back here, and imagine that we're looking at this role here, and we're saying, okay, this is the role, and somebody's in HR, and they potentially could become the head of HR in a year, 2 years, 3 years, because somebody else might be leaving, as happens. And we can actually take that and we can measure the job, we can measure the individual, and we can come up with a gap between the job and the individual and say, based on that gap, let's put a development plan in place for you. So over the next 12, 24, 36 months, you will develop and you're ready to move into that role. And in case you are thinking or asking the question, that's all very well, Pádraig, but what's the point of training them and they may then leave? And my answer to that is very, very simple. Better to train and develop people and have them leave than not train and develop them and have them stay. So just think about this really carefully. It's very important to build this succession planning. So now we have the internal recruitment process built. So when somebody leaves at lunchtime, somebody else can step into that role in the evening, and then somebody else can step into their role the following day at lunchtime, and somebody else can step into their role that evening, and so on and so forth. And one last quick comment on this, of course, one of the great things about having done this is once you've measured individuals, you can compare people to each other, which is really good in terms of people working together and how they communicate, where they are in the wheel here, for example, in terms of behaviors. There are different driving forces, what's important to them and how different they are, the competency hierarchy, and so on, and their development needs. So that's the presentation completed. I hope you found that useful. I argue very, very strongly for internal recruitment. I believe that the case I made at the very, very beginning, in the second question, the pros and cons, I think that's quite compelling. I'm not saying it is the magic bullet that is the answer to all your problems, but what I am saying is in this world we're living in today, with a labour market that is more and more dysfunctional, it is critical that you embrace this idea and say, what talent do you have in your organisation already that you may not even be aware of? That you measure this talent, you measure the roles, you compare people to the roles, and you build this internal recruitment process. I did make a point early on about transparency and the need for it. One of the beauties of this process is it eliminates bias, takes the manager's bias, the recruiter's bias out of the exercise, and it is really transparent so people can see why so-and-so got the job and they didn't. And the last comment I will make is, if you are looking at strength and you're measuring individual strengths, and somebody is aspiring to a particular role, you may be able to say, actually, that would be a mistake for you. You will fail in that role. You will not be naturally successful in that role. But over here, this is where your strengths can really, really play and where you can be really, really successful. So you can start making lateral moves. And the best example we all know is the salesman, very, very successful. We make him sales manager. So get back to my Peter principle. We don't want to be promoting people into roles where they're going to fail. We want to promote them into roles where they naturally gel, where they are just by being themselves, with their behaviors, their motivators, their competencies, their skills, their knowledge, their experience, they will naturally be successful. Measure the gap between them and that role, and then develop them over a period of time until they're ready to step into that role. People who are engaged in this way do not leave. It's a strong, I believe, the strongest retention strategy that you can have. So thank you very much. I hope you enjoyed this, and I look forward to seeing your comments.